The Atlantic is a graveyard of billion-dollar mistakes. But the greatest error of the Second World War wasn't a mechanical failure. It was a sentence in a manual that condemned thousands of men to a cold, watery grave. It wasn't just a shipwreck. It was a billion-dollar tactical suicide. How did the world's most elite navy, an empire of dreadnoughts and gold-braided admirals, manage to collapse against a ghost they were looking straight at? It was the ultimate paradox. A global superpower paralyzed by a perfect system that was actually a roadmap for their own destruction. But that was only the surface. While the admirals were drowning in their own hubris, the war was being decided in a dust-choked basement. While the experts were failing, a 19-year-old girl named Jean Laidlaw, a teenager who had never even stood on a rolling deck, was hunting the Nazi wolf packs using nothing more than a piece of string and a bit of chalk. Why did the British Empire ignore the only tactic that could save them? The answer wasn't in the classified vaults, but in the hands of the underdogs the system tried to erase. January 1942. Liverpool. The city is a landscape of wet soot and jagged ruins. At the docks, the air is thick with the smell of spilled oil and the salt crust of the Mersey. Merchant sailors, men who have survived the Great Depression only to face a colder hell, stand on the pier. They look at the gray horizon as if they are staring into their own graves. They have every reason to be afraid. In this single month, the Nazi U-boats will send nearly 500,000 tons of shipping to the bottom of the ocean. Britain is an island that breathes through its ports. Every ship lost is a lung collapsing. If the ships stop coming, the nation starves. At the center of the city, behind reinforced concrete walls, lies the Western Approaches Command Center. Inside, the atmosphere is a cocktail of cigarette smoke and quiet desperation. Admirals pace across thick carpets, surrounded by ringing telephones and maps pinned with tiny doomed markers. They are looking for a miracle, but they are looking for it in the wrong place. They are looking for it in the system. The Royal Navy of 1942 is built on a foundation of crystallized arrogance. They believe their technology is invincible because the manual says it is. They rely on a machine called ASDIC, a primitive sonar meant to hunt the hunters. But the ocean is not a laboratory. It is a chaotic, layered medium of shifting temperatures and pressures. When an ASDIC pulse hits a thermocline, a sharp boundary between warm and cold water, the sound wave doesn't penetrate. It bends. It reflects. It creates a blind spot. The mechanic of death is simple. The sonar pulse strikes the temperature layer and bounces back, showing the operator a false echo or nothing at all. The U-boat commander knows this physics by heart. He sits in the quiet shadow beneath the layer, watching the destroyer pass overhead. To the British, the machine is working perfectly. To the German, the machine is a joke. The machine doesn't fail. The men fail to understand why their perfect tool has betrayed them. Into this world of rigid tradition walks Captain Gilbert Roberts. He is a man with a sharp, mathematical mind and a reputation for unorthodox thinking, which, in the Admiralty, is a polite way of saying he is an outcast. He is 50 years old, recently recovered from tuberculosis, and effectively sidelined by a navy that finds his creativity annoying. The Admiralty has sent him to Liverpool with a task that sounds like a joke: solve the U-boat problem with no ships, no budget, and no officers. Instead, they give him a room with a green linoleum floor and a group of young women from the Women's Royal Naval Service, the Wrens. These are not seasoned veterans. They are 19-year-olds like Janet Okell and Jean Laidlaw. A few weeks ago, they were students or shop assistants. Now, they are the Western Approach's tactical unit. To the high-ranking officers upstairs, these girls are invisible. They are meant to file papers. They are meant to move the little wooden ships on the map based on the orders of the experts. They are certainly not meant to question the tactics of 1,000 years of naval history. Roberts looks at these girls, at their quick hands and sharp eyes, and he realizes something the system missed. The admirals are too close to the problem. They see the war from the bridge of a ship, through the spray of salt water and the fear of fire. The Wrens see the war from 30 feet above. Roberts instructs the girls to paint a grid on the floor. Every square represents a mile of the Atlantic. He gives them chalk. He gives them string. He tells them to recreate the sinkings, move by move, like a game of chess where the stakes are thousands of human lives. As the girls crawl across the floor, tracing the paths of the convoys and the suspected positions of the U-boats, a terrifying pattern begins to emerge. While the Navy's leaders are obsessing over the rules of engagement, the girls are looking at the evidence. While the experts upstairs are dismissing the U-boat threat as a matter of simple detection, the girls are realizing that the enemy isn't just hiding. He is evolving. The Admiralty treated the Atlantic like a chessboard where they owned all the pieces. They believed the black pit, that vast stretch of ocean where no Allied planes could reach, was merely a logistical hurdle. They treated the silence of the sea as a sign of their own control. But they had fatally underestimated the enemy's hunger. It wasn't peace. It was the breath a predator takes before it strikes. While the admirals toasted their own brilliance in the heated lounges of London, 1,000 miles away, the wolf packs were already surfacing. They weren't just waiting for the convoys. They were preparing to prove that the Royal Navy's manuals were nothing more than a list of ways to die. The hammer was about to fall, and the system was still checking its watch. On the second floor of the Western Approach's basement, the silence is heavy, broken only by the rhythmic scuff of knees on linoleum and the dry screech of chalk against the floor. Jean Laidlaw and Janet Okell are not looking at the ocean. They are looking at a puzzle made of string. To any outsider, it looks like a children's game, a strange, sprawling web of white lines and colored tokens. But to Captain Gilbert Roberts, this is the only laboratory that matters. The girls are reconstructing the death of convoy HG-76. They have the reports, they have the times, they have the last known coordinates of every merchant ship that vanished into the black. But as Jean pulls a string tight across the grid, she stops. Her brow furrows. She looks at a tiny wooden block representing a British destroyer, then at the empty space in the middle of the merchant ships. The manual says the U-boat should be out there, 5 miles away, stalking the perimeter like a wolf circling a campfire. That is where the escorts are looking. That is where they are dropping their depth charges into the empty, indifferent sea. But the math doesn't work. If the U-boat was out there, the angle of the torpedo strike would be different. The timing of the explosion would be delayed. Jean looks at Janet. They don't need a computer. They have the cold, hard logic of geometry. "He isn't outside," Jean whispers. "He's inside." It is a tactical paradox that makes the room feel suddenly colder. The U-boat, the invisible butcher, isn't hunting the convoy from the darkness. He has slipped through the defensive screen. He is sitting in the very heart of the merchant fleet, disguised by the noise and the shadows of the larger ships. The system is looking for a ghost in the woods, while the ghost is already sitting at the dinner table. The mechanism of this betrayal is as simple as it is deadly. A convoy is like a massive, slow-moving herd of cattle. The destroyers are the sheepdogs patrolling the outer edges. But the U-boat commanders have realized a fatal flaw in the British doctrine. They wait until nightfall, surface their boats, and use their low profile to slip between the outer escorts. Once inside the columns of merchant ships, they are effectively invisible. The British destroyers cannot use their sonar, their precious ASDIC, inside the convoy. The water is too turbulent, churned into a frothy mess by hundreds of massive propellers. It is like trying to hear a heartbeat in a hurricane. The U-boat fires its torpedoes at point-blank range, dives beneath the merchant hulls, and waits. The destroyers, hearing the explosion, immediately charge away from the convoy, searching the open sea for an enemy that is actually laughing at them from directly beneath their feet. Roberts realizes they have found it, the fatal flaw. But realizing it is one thing, convincing the high command is another. Enter Admiral Max Horton. Horton is the personification of the British naval establishment. He is a great war hero, a legendary submariner, and a man who carries himself with the weight of 1,000 years of tradition. He does not like theories. He certainly does not like the idea of his strategy being dismantled by a group of girls who have never stood on a rolling deck in their lives. He arrives at Western approaches not to learn, but to shut it down. "What is this nonsense?" he demands, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. He looks at the string. He looks at the chalk. He looks at Jean Laidlaw, who is 19 years old and currently holding a piece of string that contradicts his entire career. He treats the room with a crystallized arrogance. To him, this isn't warfare. It's a hobby. He believes the U-boats are failing to sink ships because his captains aren't being aggressive enough. He believes the system just needs more muscle, more steel, more blood. But Roberts doesn't flinch. He invites the Admiral to play. "Sir," Roberts says, his voice calm and objective, "if you are so certain, take the U-boat. Show us how you would survive." Horton sneers. He takes the chalk. He takes the position of the German commander. He is an ace. He knows every trick in the book. He begins to move across the floor, simulating an attack on a convoy. He moves his boat with the confidence of a man who cannot lose. But Jean Laidlaw is waiting. She has developed a counter-tactic. She calls it raspberry. It is named, quite literally, as a raspberry blown at the German Admiral Karl Dönitz. It is a maneuver designed not to hunt the U-boat, but to flush it out. As Horton fires his torpedoes from the center of the grid, Jean doesn't send her destroyers racing into the dark. Instead, she orders them to turn inward. She has them fire white star shells flares that turn night into day directly over the merchant ships. Horton freezes. The black box of his strategy is suddenly illuminated. In the simulation, his U-boat is caught on the surface, trapped between the very ships he was trying to sink, blinded by the sudden light. He tries to dive, but Jean's destroyers are already there, dropping a pattern of depth charges that leave no room for escape. The Admiral doesn't offer a handshake. He doesn't offer a nod of respect. He stands over the chalk-smeared linoleum, his face the color of cold ash. The room is so quiet you can hear the rain hitting the reinforced glass 3 floors up. He looks at Janet, a girl who smells of cheap soap and tea, and sees the wreckage of his own ego. He realizes he didn't just lose a game. He was exposed as an accidental butcher. He drops the chalk. It snaps on the floor. Without a word, he turns and walks out, the heavy thud of his boots the only sound of his retreat. He leaves behind a silence that isn't peaceful. It's shameful. The men in the room won't look at the Wrens. To acknowledge their genius is to acknowledge their own lethal incompetence, and his own doctrine so blind. Horton looked at the green linoleum and saw a game he had lost. He believed his experience was a shield, but it had become a blindfold. He treated the girl's string as a nuisance, but he had fatally underestimated the power of logic over tradition. It wasn't a glitch in the Navy, it was a total collapse of the establishment's ego. While the Admiral stood in his polished boots, the hammer, the cold reality of the raspberry maneuver, was about to be swung. It wasn't just a win for the Wrens. It was a death sentence for the U-boat wolf packs that thought they owned the Atlantic. The rules of the sea had changed, and the men in charge were the last to know. The raspberry was more than a tactic. It was a revolution. Within weeks, every escort commander in the Atlantic was being ordered to Liverpool. They arrived skeptical, smelling of tobacco and salt, only to be forced onto their knees by Jean and Janet. They were taught to see the geometry of death. They were taught that their ships weren't just weapons. They were pieces in a mathematical equation. But as the tide begins to turn, as the U-boats begin to disappear from the maps, a new shadow begins to fall over the basement. The more successful the Wrens become, the more the system begins to sharpen its knives. Victory is coming. But for the women who paved the way, the reward will not be what they expect. May 1943. The Mid-Atlantic. The ocean is a landscape of jagged black glass. Somewhere beneath the surface, U-664 slides through the stillness. Its commander is confident. He has spent years treating the British Navy like a slow-moving target. He believes the Black Pit is his private hunting ground. He relies on the darkness. He relies on the fact that when he strikes, the British destroyers will panic and scatter into the void, leaving their merchant ships exposed. But tonight, the math has changed. A mile above, the HMS Starling isn't panicking. Its captain, Johnny Walker, isn't guessing. He is executing a raspberry. The maneuver is a masterpiece of kinetic geometry. As the first merchant ship blossoms into a pillar of fire, the destroyers don't charge away into the night. They turn inward, pivoting on a central axis calculated weeks ago on a green floor in Liverpool. They fire White Star shells, turning the midnight sea into a surgical theater. The U-boat commander is blinded. He tries to dive, but he is already inside the kill zone. The destroyers are dropping depth charges in a specific overlapping grid, a creeping attack. The mechanic of this destruction is brutal. A depth charge is a cylinder of high explosives with a hydrostatic fuse. When it reaches a precise depth, the water pressure triggers the blast. Because water is incompressible, the explosion sends a physical pulse through the sea like a sledgehammer. It doesn't need to hit the U-boat. It just needs to strike the water near it to unzip the steel seams. The rivets pop. The pressure hull designed to withstand the weight of the ocean buckles inward, crushing the air and the men inside in a fraction of a second. The invisible butcher is no longer invisible. He is a sinking wreck of twisted iron. In May 1943 alone, 41 U-boats are destroyed. It is a slaughter so total that the German High Command is forced to withdraw from the Atlantic. The blockade is cracked. The lifeblood of the empire begins to flow again. And in the basement in Liverpool, Janet Okell and Jean Laidlaw put down their chalk. They don't cheer. They simply look at the floor, at the strings that represent thousands of men who are still alive because a group of teenagers refuse to believe the experts. The admirals looked at the mounting U-boat losses and claimed it was a victory for British grit and superior breeding. They treated the sudden turn of the tide as an inevitability of their own command. But they had fatally underestimated the source of their salvation. It wasn't the heavy guns that won the Atlantic. It was the quiet logic of the Wrens. While the victory parades were being planned in London, the hammer, the cold bureaucratic machinery of the Navy, was already preparing to erase the very people who had forged the weapon. The war was being won, but the women who won it were about to find out that the system has a very short memory for those it considers temporary. The war is over. The U-boats surrender in the cold locks of Scotland, their dark holes looking like dead whales against the shore. The world celebrates. There are medals. There are knighthoods. Admiral Max Horton is hailed as the man who saved the Atlantic. But what of the Western Approach's tactical unit? As the lights go on across Europe, the lights in the Liverpool basement are turned off. The green linoleum is scrubbed clean. The chalk marks are washed away. The Wrens are given a polite thank you and a rail ticket home. They are told to go back to being housewives, secretaries, and shop assistants. Their work, the tactical maneuvers that broke the back of the Nazi Navy, is classified as secret and then buried in the archives. John Laidlaw returns to a life of quiet anonymity. Janet Okell, the girl who outmaneuvered the Navy's top minds at the age of 19, slips back into the shadows of history. When the official victory books are written, their names are missing. The maps in the museums show the movements of the ships, but they don't show the girls who moved the strings. Captain Gilbert Roberts is retired. He isn't given a fleet to command. He is sidelined, his unorthodox brilliance once again a threat to the comfortable traditions of the Admiralty. This is the bitter aftertaste. The system didn't forget Jean and Janet. It deleted them. This wasn't a clerical error. It was a corporate liquidation. Once the threat was neutralized, the fixers became a liability to the brand. We see this echo every day, the whistleblowers silenced by the board, the engineers ignored by the bureaucrats, the people who actually know why it's breaking, being escorted out of the building by security. The Wrens didn't just win a war, they provided a blueprint for how the machine survives. It uses your soul to fix the engine, then throws you in the scrap heap before the victory parade begins. The Atlantic is quiet now. But the arrogance that nearly sank the world, that is still very much in command. If you believe that stories like Jean Laidlaw's and Janet Okell's deserve to be remembered, join our ranks by subscribing. Help us ensure that the people history forgot are never truly lost. We have synthesized this narrative from reputable historical archives and verified sources. However, the fog of war often extends to the history books. If you spot any inaccuracies or have additional details to share, please correct us in the comments. We strive for the absolute truth, and your knowledge helps us get there. Thank you for keeping history alive.